Welcome to Daily Digest. At the time of making this video, which is April 2025, President Trump has imposed major tariffs on imports, including a massive 145% tariff on Chinese goods. These tariffs have already started shaking up the global economy, leaving many to wonder what will happen next. Will the US come out on top? Or could this lead to higher prices, a trade war, and an uncertain future? In this video, we'll break down what tariffs really are, how they impact consumers like you, and what you can expect moving forward. Stay with us until the end, because by the time you're done watching, you'll know exactly how these tariffs will impact your wallet, your everyday purchases, and the future of the global economy. Don't miss out on the insights you need to understand what's coming next. Now, let's take a closer look at what tariffs are, how they work, and why they matter. A tariff is essentially a tax that a government imposes on imported goods. But here's where it gets interesting. Tariffs aren't just a price tag added to a product. They create a ripple effect that stretches far beyond what you see on store shelves. Let's say you're at your local electronics store and you're eyeing the latest high-end phone that costs $1,200. Now, let's assume that the phone is made in China and a 10% tariff is imposed on Chinese imports. Suddenly, that phone costs you $1,320. It seems simple enough, right? But the situation is actually a lot more complicated than just that $120 price bump. You see, tariffs don't just affect the price of the product itself, they affect everything that goes into getting that product from the factory to your hands. From the components that make up the phone, like the microchips or the screen, to the trucks that transport it across the country, to the shelves it sits on in the store. All of these elements often rely on imported materials or equipment, which can now be more expensive due to tariffs. For example, you might buy a bag of apples grown in your home state with no tariffs. But if the farmers use machinery imported from overseas, guess what? Those machines just got more expensive to produce and ship. Now, even though the apples themselves aren't taxed, the costs involved in growing and delivering those apples go up, which gets passed on to you at the checkout line. The same logic applies to nearly every product we purchase. Even products that seem purely local can be affected by tariffs simply because of how interconnected the global supply chain is. For instance, a car built in the US might be assembled here, but many of its parts like tires, electronics, and even seats are often imported from other countries. If tariffs make these parts more expensive, the cost of the car goes up, even if it's US made. So, while tariffs are often presented as a way to protect local industries and jobs, the truth is a bit more complex. They don't just protect local businesses, they also increase costs for consumers. That means you end up paying more for everything, not just imported goods. And while some industries may benefit in the short term, the overall cost of living can rise for everyone. Now that we understand what tariffs are, let's talk about what they actually mean for you, the consumer. Because while tariffs may seem like an issue happening on a global scale, the effects trickle down to your wallet every single day. At first glance, it might seem like tariffs only impact luxury or high-tech goods like electronics, but the reality is that virtually everything you buy can be affected. Whether it's food, clothing, or the car you drive, tariffs create a snowball effect that can increase prices across the board. Let's take a closer look at how this unfolds. Imagine you're at the clothing store eyeing that brand new jacket you've been wanting. You might think, well, it's made right here in the US, so it won't be affected by tariffs. But here's the catch. The entire supply chain behind that jacket is likely influenced by imported goods. The fabric could be sourced from overseas. The zippers, buttons, and stitching materials are also likely imported. The machinery that manufactures the jacket? Chances are, it's built using parts from other countries. Even the trucks that deliver that jacket to the store rely on components made abroad. When tariffs are imposed on these imported components, it doesn't just affect the price of the jacket itself, it drives up the cost of everything involved in getting them from the factory to your shopping cart. That $100 jacket could easily cost you $150 or even more, as the increased costs throughout the supply chain get passed down to consumers. And it's not just the physical goods we buy that are impacted. Services like car repairs, home improvements, and even tech support might also get pricier due to the cost of importing the tools and components necessary for these services. So, while you may think of tariffs only affecting the things you can see on the store shelves, the impact is far-reaching, affecting nearly every service and product you rely on in daily life. Now, let's address what tariffs are really trying to accomplish. On the surface, the idea behind tariffs is simple: protect local industries, especially those that might struggle against cheaper foreign competition. By making imported goods more expensive, the thinking is that consumers will opt for domestically produced alternatives, thus supporting American workers and businesses. But as we've seen, the reality is a bit more complicated. In the short term, tariffs can boost certain industries. For example, U.S. manufacturers that compete with imported goods might see an uptick in sales. This could lead to more jobs in those industries and potentially even higher wages. On the other hand, consumers are left paying higher prices, which can hurt households across the country, especially those already living paycheck to paycheck. But here's where it gets more interesting. The long-term effects could be even more profound. If tariffs succeed in pushing companies to bring production back to the U.S., they may face challenges. As we all know, American wages tend to be higher than those in places like China or Vietnam, and production costs here can be much steeper. This means that even if production shifts back to the U.S., it may come with a hefty price tag. In fact, many economists argue that the cost of bringing back production won't just affect the industries directly involved. It could cause a broader shift in the U.S. economy. Higher wages and higher production costs could ultimately result in inflation, which means that consumers will be paying more, not just for imported goods, but for almost everything. So why is the U.S. imposing all of these tariffs in the first place? The primary aim is to reduce the trade deficit and create a more level playing field between the U.S. and its trading partners. But here's the thing: the situation is far more complex than just protecting local industries. The real goal is strategic dominance, not self-sufficiency. At the heart of the tariff strategy is the idea of strengthening American economic power on the global stage. By making foreign goods more expensive, the U.S. hopes to push foreign companies to pay a price for accessing the vast American market, one of the largest and most lucrative in the world. The aim is to force foreign nations to negotiate better trade deals, one where the U.S. is in a stronger position, not just as a market, but as a competitive global power. This is a bold move, but here's the challenge: the cost of this maneuver could be far higher than anticipated. If U.S. companies can't reduce the cost of manufacturing and labor enough, they may struggle to remain competitive against foreign companies, even with tariffs in place. The hope is that, over time, the U.S. will come out on top, gaining more control and influence over the global market. The expectation is that the short-term challenges such as higher prices, inflation, and economic disruptions will eventually lead to greater economic strength, as they will hurt other countries more than the U.S. The goal is not to make the U.S. fully self-sufficient, but to make sure it holds the upper hand in trade negotiations, making the country more competitive and less reliant on the terms set by other economic superpowers. But here's the key question: will it work? That's where things get speculative. While some economists argue that these tariffs could help the U.S. close the trade deficit and revitalize key industries, others believe the long-term consequences could be dire. You see, the global market is incredibly interconnected, and while the U.S. may become more self-sufficient, it could also face increased costs as businesses pass on higher production prices to consumers. And don't forget, many of the countries won't just sit back and accept these tariffs without a fight. The more tariffs are imposed, the more likely it is that other countries will retaliate by imposing their own tariffs on U.S. exports. This could hurt American companies that rely on global markets to sell their goods. Think of it like a game of economic chess. If one country makes a move, others are likely to respond in kind. But it's not just about price hikes and retaliatory tariffs. Another serious concern is de-dollarization. As countries grow tired of dealing with U.S. tariffs and trade policies, they might start bypassing the U.S. dollar in international trade. This could drastically reduce the demand for the dollar, leading to a devaluation of the currency. We're already seeing early signs of this. There are rumors that China and the European Union will start negotiating zero-tariff trade deals that would bypass the dollar entirely. If the U.S. dollar loses its dominant position in global trade, the implications could be huge. The most obvious impact would be inflation in the U.S. If other countries are no longer buying goods in dollars, the relative value of the dollar could drop, causing prices to rise here at home. This means that not only would the tariffs themselves make things more expensive, but the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar could decline, making everyday goods less affordable. Let's talk about what will actually happen down the road. This isn't just about what the tariffs could do right now, it's about the bigger picture. Will the US economy emerge stronger, or could this entire experiment backfire? Tariffs could strategically boost the US economy by reducing dependence on foreign markets and encouraging domestic production. With higher costs for foreign goods, US industries will innovate, creating jobs and reducing the trade deficit. Sectors like electric vehicles could thrive, with American-made products becoming more competitive, while foreign companies will have to enter the market at much more favorable terms for the US. However, success depends on US companies maintaining price and quality competitiveness to avoid consumers seeking cheaper foreign alternatives. While tariffs might help local industries, they could also lead to inflation with higher prices on everyday goods. Retaliation from other countries could escalate the trade war, hurting US exports and leading to job losses. Future leading companies will shy away from the US market, and Americans will miss out on key innovations. De-dollarization could weaken the US dollar, causing inflation to rise further and reducing Americans' purchasing power, making imports more expensive and straining the economy. That would also lower the grip the US has on global politics. Now, we've talked about tariffs and their potential effects on prices and jobs, but there's another key element to this conversation that often gets overlooked: the value of money itself and how it's linked to gold. For decades, gold has been seen as the ultimate safe haven asset, a way to hedge against inflation and economic uncertainty. Historically, when economies face challenges, investors flock to gold because it tends to hold its value better than paper currencies. During times of high inflation, currency value drops, but gold often rises as people seek something more stable. Think of it like this. In the 1970s, when inflation was running rampant, gold prices skyrocketed. Investors saw gold as a way to protect their wealth when the dollar was losing purchasing power. However, in today's economy, things are a bit more complicated. While gold's value is generally stable, it's becoming less relevant as a hedge against inflation in the modern financial system. Central banks around the world, especially the US, are printing more money than ever before. The US dollar, once tied to the gold standard, is no longer backed by gold, which means its value is increasingly determined by the decisions of central banks and the global economic environment. So, what does this mean for you? While gold might still hold its value as an asset, its ability to protect your purchasing power in everyday life is weakening. If inflation continues to rise, as we expect it might with the ongoing tariff wars and global financial policies, the value of the US dollar could drop, and your savings could lose buying power. Even though gold's price may increase, it may not fully offset the losses in the purchasing power of the dollar. Here's where the concept of currency devaluation comes into play. As tariffs are imposed, prices rise, and the economy faces inflationary pressures, the purchasing power of the US dollar could diminish. A weaker dollar means that the same $100 you have today will buy you fewer goods and services tomorrow. Back in 1990, $100 could easily get you a week's worth of groceries, a decent night out, and even some small savings. Fast forward to 2025, and that same $100 may only cover a few days of groceries and a meal at a fast casual restaurant. That's a reflection of inflation, where the value of your money erodes over time. It's not just about how much your dollars can get you compared to other currencies, but about how much actual goods you can purchase with those dollars. But that's not all. De-dollarization is another key concern. BRICS countries and parts of the European Union are already reducing their reliance on the dollar. If this continues, it could lead to a loss of global dollar dominance, causing the US currency to weaken even further. Here's the real problem. Without the dollar's status as the global reserve currency, the US will no longer be able to diminish its foreign debt by simply inflating the currency. In the past, the US could print more money, reduce the real value of its debt, and effectively manage it through inflation. But if the dollar loses its dominance in global trade, the US will have to pay back that debt in full with real money. This could mean higher taxes, cuts to social services, and more economic strain on ordinary Americans. As the US government struggles to handle its debt without the ability to rely on inflation, it could have ripple effects across the economy, potentially leading to higher interest rates, more debt, and greater financial instability, all of which would impact you directly. All this tariff business may have many potential long-term benefits like a stronger, self-sufficient economy, but the short-term reality is higher costs, inflation, and risks to the dollar's value. As the economic landscape shifts, your purchasing power could be hit hard, and the financial stability you rely on might feel less certain. Understanding these changes gives you the power to navigate the future with more insight and confidence. Stay informed, keep an eye on global developments, and remember, the more you know, the better prepared you'll be. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more insights that help you stay ahead of the curve.